Hi everybody. I'm the CEO of SignUp Software, and I'm together with Ollie here, gonna talk a little bit about our solution and company. We've been around for quite some while. We started in 1999, so we were really early on Navision 3.7 and Axapta 3.0. And our first customer that we actually got here on Navision, that was Öhmans Fondkommission in Sweden, a banking thing there, and they're still with us. So we're going to celebrate 20-year anniversary. So basically, you can say that ExFlow is a solution that is impossible basically to outgrow in times of number of years, but also in terms of number of invoices. And we got the really small customers that just process a couple of 100 invoices per year to the millions of the blue chip customers then. And then we've been a classical Swedish export company going, to Australia, to the US, and a bunch of other countries. We did an IPO to the NASDAQ, and so on. And today then we're about 120 employees, but the real power is actually with our partners like Eleqtus. We estimate there's about 1,000 plus consultants that work with ExFlow and have been trained on it. And about 80% of our sales goes through these partners. And we're about 1,500 customers even today, and the software is used in over 60 countries, in different languages and different tax reasons and stuff like that. And then we have offices in the EMEAs and the APAC and Americas. So just a little bit on the numbers. It's about 250,000 people that use this tool every day to approve their invoices, and about 10 million invoices and that are being processed. So it's a pretty proven solution from that perspective. And here are some of the clients. So I think you are from different parts of Europe here, but there's the Australian Football League, and there's Chicago Bears if you're into sports, and if you like to go to amusement parks, you have Tivoli there. If you like to take care of money, it's Denmark's national bank. And then we have Doctors Without Borders and the Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, and the Svenska Röda Korset. Northvolt is fun as well. They're doing the batteries to the new BMWs and Volkswagen. So the gigafactory of Europe, trying to compete with Tesla to make batteries to the European car industry then. We have Coca-Cola, big blue chips, rolling out to all the African countries. They have SAP in other geographies, but for Africa, they went with Microsoft, and Microsoft comes to us and say, hey, we got a gap towards SAP. We need to fill that and have a strong AP automation solution. We sign a deal with Coca-Cola, and then we run it out or roll it out. So it's a big variety of different verticals and different sizes and different countries on this. IKEA, Scania, a couple of other ones. Mattress Firm is actually one of the biggest Dynamics customers that Microsoft has. So it's a US retail customers. And David Spencer, who's the IT director there. I just had a call with our US team before this, so they're going to have a meeting with him tomorrow here as well. But it was quite challenging from terms of performance. They have huge volumes, up to 60,000 rows on an invoice. So processing to the stretch of what D365 can handle. And since we are built in, we are of course dependent that works as well. But we've shown that we can handle the really complex and big ones as well. This is Coca-Cola. You see rolled out to here, Africa, Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, Mozambique, and so on. They're a third into this rollout. So these 60 countries I talked about, that will actually be 70 when Coca-Cola is done rolling this out. Some of our colleagues in the business, SignUp, we are the only player that has both built in for BC, Business Central, the little sister in Microsoft's ERP suite, and F&O, which the larger ones are using that. So we have both of those and had that for the last 20 years. Continia are some Danish colleagues that have it only for BC. And then we got some Dutch colleagues in the business called Extension, and they have it only for F&O. And then there's another a couple of Finns, DoUp and Busware, and then a couple of Americans. Bottom line, Medius has its origin in Sweden, but is bought by a US company and moved their headquarters over there. The common thing for all of these below here is that they actually operate outside the ERP system. That means you need an integration, but they are also good at interacting with SAP and Oracle and stuff like that. But we only work inside because we're totally built in. If you talk F&O, it's built with X++ inside F&O or AX 2012, or whatever version you have. All right, so what is the advantage of being built in then? You don't need any integration, no synchronization, no duplicates of master data. You don't need the general ledgers and all the vendors in the outside system. And you don't need two consultants. You can have one finance consultant that can handle both of these. You just need one DevOps. And for IT managers, it's often good to have it inside the same secure environment that you have your ERP system in. You don't have to have redundant. And then it's easy to deploy. We just deployed here to a rather big competitor to Starbucks. They rolled out in 29 countries, and the partner spent 63 hours to get that up and running. They had their F&O already up and running. The ERP was there, but our partner in this case down in Denmark that did that project, they only spent 63 hours to get it up in all of those countries. So it's pretty amazing how much you can do with a standard functionality. In the old times, you would have asked your partner, hey, do some extra on top of standard Microsoft, and they could spend hundreds of hours just developing that, and you would get very little functionality. But now you can get a standard package, just don't download it from the Microsoft App Source or LCS, and then it's inside of your environment. So the whole deployment goes fast, and you have the one version compatibility. So you imagine you save quite a lot of money doing this. And then, of course, when you have bought a very potent system like Microsoft ERP system, you don't want to have redundant functionality in a second system. So if you have an outside system, they are usually going to try to sell more things in purchasing and supplier communication and stuff like that. That is actually redundant with the licenses that you have already bought. What we do, we only add things where Microsoft have holes, and we enhance the functionality. And where Microsoft is good, for example, three-way matching, we use that engine. So we use everything that you already bought, but you get the best of breed that is built in. And then, of course, gives both lower cost, better compliance, better control. Most of our customer has less than 3 months of payback of implementing this. And then depending, of course, what's your mix on how many you get on paper and e-invoices and PDFs emailed and stuff like that. So here's a little bit of a summary here then how the process looks like. You have to catch the data. So if you get everything in e-invoices, you can just drive it right into your ERP environment. The big blue block here is your F&O or BC environment. And then we have our little bubble inside of here. But of course, we need to get the outside data in. So if it's already in XML format, we can drive it right in. If it comes in PDF or paper, we need to run it through a capture solution. We are agnostic to any type of capture solution, but Kofax or ReadSoft product is the best one out there that we've tried. So if you buy it through us, then we bundle it, or you can outsource this whole process and buy it for a network player that has this functionality as well, and just start the process here. But this is if you have paper and PDF still, this is usually the recommended solution. And then you get in here, import validation, pre-coding. Here we can of course use AI to suggest how you should code the product or the invoice, and how you also should who should approve it and something like that. But Ollie will get more into that. And then we, of course, leverage what Microsoft has, the platform for Power BI, the Power Automate. You can build apps here, and we have some standard apps that we ship with as well for specific tasks. And then you can do the cloud approval here. For example, myself, I do the approvals on my phone in ExFlow. We are running BC internally, and then I approve it here. And then Copilot is coming here as well. So we've done some initial tests here, but it's still quite early phases. So Peppol, for those of you who are working that's actually a new thing that we're releasing right now. You see the ExFlow tab here, and then we have an ExFlow document integration where you directly from inside of ExFlow F&O also then can send invoices on the outgoing side then, and just look in the Peppol directory who is available to receive it. On the OCR engines, we also promised to mention a little bit on that and what Microsoft is doing. We have tried very many of these. You see some of the names up here that you might know or not know, but all of these are OCR engines that looks at the data and tries to interpret it when it does not come as XML already. And Microsoft has made now a competitor to Kofax. So a first version is about to come out. We've done tests with Google, and LaserNet has also an OCR function on top of the output management or ECM functionality as well. Ancora, Snowfox, But what you need actually to run this really good is that you need a good invoice capture solution. You need something for the accounts payable team, preferably inside the ERP system, and then you need an efficient end user approval. That's the three pillars of efficient AP automation. And Microsoft is now then delivering this also as a part of the Power Platform directly connected to F&O. So that will be a good complement for the smaller customers for where we've, the last 20 years used Kofax. Now Microsoft also has a solution for that. And that looks like this. The invoices are coming in through Outlook or through a file share into a data lake using Power Automate, getting the data from Dataverse. And then Microsoft has then built a Power App that presents this and also then connects to D365. So this is possible to download in a private a public preview right now, and I think it's going to be around in August when they will do the public or the general availability of this. When you can start installing it. We've been working with it for a year and a half now and looked at it, and its gradual evolution from the baby to now, let's say, something that at least can crawl and soon be able to walk as well. And we've done a comparison between Microsoft Invoice Capture and with ExFlow Data Capture and with Google as well. And you see the balls are filled here in a different percentage, basically. Some things that Microsoft cannot do really yet, but they probably in a couple of years they will have filled most of these circles then. But right now it's probably for the ones that have lower volumes of invoices that should use the Microsoft one. And then Google is pretty strong actually, but still we see the ExFlow Data Capture, though the ReadSoft product is still superior to the other solutions. But however, if you'd like to do that, we also have an import method. So no matter if you're using Kofax or Microsoft Invoice Capture or Pagero or some other network supplier, we have different import methods. So you can always bring it in and do then the AP automation inside with the end user approval as well, which is the main part of the ExFlow functionality. Yes. So that was the overview of SignUp as a company and AP automation with us. So anybody any questions regarding that? Or should we look at a demo? So let's move over to the demo then. Ollie, please, stage is yours.
Thank you, Olof. I'm going to start by presenting my screen. And before I jump into D365, there is one slide that you covered, but I usually like to emphasize because that's basically what I'm going to go through throughout this session. So please let me know once you see my screen.
We got it.
Brilliant. So as Olof mentioned, regardless of whether you receive the invoice in hard copy, soft copy, or electronic invoice, it needs to go through the data capture application, whether it's ReadSoft or any other third-party application. As long as it generates the file types required by ExFlow, you're good to go. Basically, once the invoice goes through the OCR application, Now you scan the invoice, two file types will be generated, a PDF image of the actual invoice and an XML file holding the interpreted data. Once these two files are ready, through an API communication between D365 and the OCR application, these two files will be pulled inside D365 in a new module that you will have in your D365 instance called ExFlow. The initial form where those invoices would land in is called the import form. At that stage, the invoice is validated according to standard D365, according to Microsoft, of course. And I want you to know if the invoice is a non-PO invoice, it can be automatically coded. ExFlow out of the box provides more than 5 different features to automatically code your invoices. There's two commonly used features across our clients. The first one is AI machine learning, which basically learns from the AP persons. It learns from the approvers if they're coding the invoice or if they've got the privilege to do so, and it creates clusters behind the scenes. The next time an invoice comes in, if it shares similar properties of a previously coded invoice, the invoice will be automatically coded with literally no human interaction. The other feature is based on business rules, where you could basically say, if the invoice is coming from that specific supplier, I want the following allocations to be coded on the invoice. Or if there's specific text scanned from the invoice in a reference field, you might want to have a totally different allocations added on the invoice. Now, very important to note that ExFlow is utilizing all the standard D365 invoice validation parameters. So whatever you set up in D365 for invoice validation, ExFlow automatically adapts to it. Whether you've got three-way matching, two-way matching, price tolerances, charges tolerances, all those parameters, you name it, ExFlow automatically adapts to it. And that's, of course, a competitive advantage compared to all our competitors who are operating outside D365, who need to maintain the same parameters twice, once inside D365 and another time on their own application, which is running outside D365. Very important to know that if you've got an invoice fully matching, no discrepancies, this invoice is going to be automatically approved. Any discrepancy on the invoice will be sent out for approval. Now, ExFlow as an application is delivered out of the box with two different platforms where you can approve your invoices. There's one inside D365 called ExFlow Web, and there's one outside the one outside D365 is called ExFlow Web, whereas the one inside D365, it's a workspace. Now, the majority of our clients, they prefer the ExFlow Web application, which is outside D365 because it's super user-friendly when it comes to mobile devices. As Olof mentioned a couple of minutes ago, he is always approving invoices using his mobile device. I mean, no one wants to open a computer today to approve their invoices, although they can do it. But usually you just want to grab your phone, have a look at the invoice and approve the invoice. Now, after the invoice is approved, there's going to be a batch job picking up this invoice and doing the final posting to D365. Last but not least, ExFlow out of the box is also delivered with key performance indicators, dashboards that would give the management team at any company using ExFlow full overview of their AP automation. They could basically track and trace the performance of the AP persons, track and trace the performance of their approvers, and most importantly, the performance of your suppliers. You want to know which are the top suppliers you're working with, who are the worst suppliers you're working with. Which suppliers are sending you the majority of invoices with quantity variances, which suppliers are sending you the majority of invoices with price variances. All this information is going to be exposed to you in amazing dashboards that are simple to read. That being said, I'm going to jump into the interesting part inside D365. And just to verify what Olof mentioned earlier in his PowerPoint presentation, ExFlow is fully built inside D365. We're using the same interface. We're adapting to all the gadgets that Microsoft is introducing to D365, keeping in mind that Microsoft is investing millions of dollars into their interface. Now, throughout this session, I'm going to be focused on two main forms. The first one is called the import form, and here's where the invoice initially resides. At that stage, the invoice is in draft status. As an AP person, you could log into the import form, pick up any invoice, adjust any value on the invoice, whether it's header information or line information. There's no financial impact at that stage. The second form that we will be focused on too is called the document form. And that would be the main form for the AP persons to find all registered invoices regardless of its status. It could be active out for approval, it could be approved, finally posted, or even canceled. Now, before I jump into the import form to see the list of invoices we've got in there, I want you to know that we've got pre-filtered menus out there where you could see all the invoices in the import form, non-PO or expense invoices in import form, purchase order invoices in import form, and same thing applies to the document form. All invoices there, non-PO, cost invoices, purchase order invoices in document. Let's jump into the import form and have a look at the list of invoices that we've got in there. I should have refreshed the session. Or, yeah, good. So now we're in the import form. Here's the list of invoices that we got in here. Did I lose it again? Right, let's do that. ExFlow, it should be faster now. Good. So here's the list of invoices that we have in the import form. Before I dig into the data that we've got on the invoices, I want you to know that there's two amazing features about ExFlow. The first one is called cross company, which basically allows you to see invoices across all the legal entities that you have access to. And all you have to do is click on cross company, hit the checkbox saying show all companies, and ExFlow will expose all the invoices in the legal entities that you have access to in one single view. So you don't have to go back and forth between legal entities like you do in standard D365 to find invoices if you're working in 5 or 6 legal entities. When using ExFlow, just hit that checkbox. You can see now invoices from different legal entities are visible for you. Now, that's not the only feature that might be interesting to an AP person. One thing that an AP person is concerned about is displaying the invoice image. If you're working with standard D365, you probably know the clipboard to the right side where you can have multiple attachments added to the invoice. And one of them might be the invoice image. And if you've got multiple attachments, you might be so lucky to find the invoice image on the first hit. When using ExFlow, all you have to do is click on General, say Show Invoice, and ExFlow will expose proper scale of the invoice image. Even if you have 5, 6, 7 attachments attached to the invoice, ExFlow will identify which one is the invoice image. So that's one way of showing it. We usually recommend that the AP persons, they should have 2 screens, one to display the invoice image and another one to view the data on the invoice or the data that was captured from the invoice. And to achieve this, you probably know the key in standard D365 called Open in a New Window. If you click on it, the invoice image would open in a separate browsing session. Now, I'm going to pretend that I've got 2 screens. So I'm going to split my screen into 2. And I'm going to alter from one invoice to another. And you're going to see that the respective invoice image would update accordingly, although I'm working in 2 separate browsing sessions. Right? Now, that's not the only way to display the invoice image. I'm going to go back, expand that view. All right. In version called version D365 called 8.0 that was introduced by Microsoft, I think it was more than 2 years ago, they introduced a feature called side by side. We brought that same feature in, but we made it better than what Microsoft is delivering. Now, the side-by-side is basically supposed to split the same browsing session into 50% invoice image, 50% invoice data. And in order to expose it to ExFlow forms, all you have to do is click on General, View Side-by-Side, and your browsing session is going to be split into 50% invoice image, 50% invoice data, exactly what Microsoft is delivering in a specific form called pending invoices in D365. Now, what we've done better than Microsoft, we introduced a splitter allowing the AP person to adjust the invoice image to whatever size that suits them. So I could basically minimize the invoice image and put it on a 30% scale. And of course, I could leave the import form, come back in again, and I would realize that the invoice image resides in the exact same size as I left it in my last session. Now, not only that, we're treating every form separately when it comes to the side-by-side. So in the grid list, I have the side-by-side exposed on a 40% scale, let's say. If I edit the invoice, the side-by-side might not be there. And of course, you can have the side-by-side in one form. In other form, you could hide it, or you could have a different scale of the side-by-side. So now I'm in the edit view. I could click on general, say view side by side. Initially, it would pop up on a 50% scale. I could adjust it. Let's say I want to have a better view here. I want it on a 60 or 70% scale. And then I'm going to leave the edit view back to the grid list. You would realize that in the grid list, the size of the invoice image is still set to 30 or 40%. Whereas in the edit view, if I go back in again, the side-by-side would be available on a 70% scale. Now, very important to note that this will not impact any of your colleagues. You set the invoice image to whatever size that suits you based on your preference and how you prefer to work as an AP person inside D365. I'm going to hide the side-by-side. And now we're going to move on talking about the invoices that we've got in the list, right, side by side again. So we have a better view of the data that we've got in here. Back to the import form, side by side should not be there any longer. Perfect. So let's look at the data that we have on the list of invoices in here. The first column is basically showing you to which legal entity is the invoice being addressed to. Since you have a cross-company view, that means you can have invoices pointing to different legal entities. You can see the invoice number that was scanned from the invoice. Also, the purchase order number, which basically signifies whether this is a purchase order invoice or a non-PO invoice. If there is no PO number, then it's a cost invoice. If there is a purchase order number associated with the invoice, it's basically telling you that this is a purchase order invoice. What's very cool about ExFlow, it's basically showing you the status of the PO from the import form. At the stage the invoice is still in draft, you could basically see what is the status of this purchase order. So you basically have transparency between ExFlow and D365. Now, of course, you could see the user ID, and that's basically to ensure there's one AP person editing the invoice at a time. ExFlow will make sure that there's no two AP persons adjusting the same invoice at the same time. And that's why before you can adjust any value, you need to take the invoice. The process of taking the invoice can, of course, be automated using workflows. Moreover, we've got the vendor account, the name of the supplier. You could also see the voucher number used in D365, the amount on the invoice, and more information related to the transactional dates. And the more you scroll to the right side, the more header information you're going to see. Just below it, you have the line information. In this case, I've selected a non-PO invoice or a cost invoice. I could see the lines below. The line type is ledger. It could be project. It could be a fixed asset. It could be a procurement. In that case, it's a ledger. Now, next to it, I could see the accounting, the codings put on the line. You might be wondering if I coded those lines manually. Basically, I did not. As I mentioned earlier, there's a couple of features that we deliver out of the box that can automatically code your invoices, one of which is AI machine learning. The other one is called posting proposal, which is based on business rules. You could say if it's coming from that supplier, I want the following allocations to be coded, or if there is a specific text scan, you might want to have a totally different allocations added to the invoice. You can see the amount split on the lines, and most importantly, the workflows adding the approvers to the line. What's interesting about ExFlow workflows, they're quite instant compared to D365, and also they're data-driven. You could build very complex workflows in just few steps. It will also show you the list of all the approvers in one place, which is not the case in D365. Now what I'm going to do next, I'm going to pick up one of the invoices that I have in here. I'm going to copy the invoice number so we could keep track of the invoice. We've got the header information up on top. If we look at the lines, we've got two coded lines. We could see the amount. And if we look at the approvers, we've got my colleague, Maria, is suggested on both of the lines of this invoice. Now, I'm going to register this invoice, keeping in mind that there will be a batch job picking up the valid invoices and automatically registering those on behalf of the AP person. But the reason this batch job is not on in this demo is because I wanted to show you that invoice, otherwise it will be directly registered with no one even seeing it. So in that case, I'm going to click on General, hit Post as in Register. It's not finally posting the invoice, it's only registering it in the 365. And as soon as I register the invoice, it's going to leave the import form and it will land in the document form. Now, while this is being registered, I'm going to duplicate this page. And we will visit the document form and we're going to try to search for that invoice. We go to ExFlow, document form. And again, just to remind you, the document form will be the main form for the AP persons to follow up on all registered invoices, regardless of its status. It could be active out for approval. It could be approved. That means all the lines on the invoice is approved. It could be invoice. It's finally posted or even canceled. Right now, this invoice is now approved. I could see the message here that we've got in the import form, and it says the invoice with the following number was automatically approved according to agreement 6522. Although this is a non-PO invoice, we have a feature in ExFlow called agreements where you can define a criteria under which you can automate the approval process of a non-PO invoice. There's two main reasons to use this feature. It's either that you have a contract between you and your supplier, you're renting an office, you're paying 100,000 euros on a monthly basis, and this landlord is sending you an invoice of 100,000 euros on a monthly basis that you already have a contract for. You don't want to waste the time of administration looking at this invoice. Define that in ExFlow agreements. The invoice is going to be automatically approved without wasting anybody's time. So if we go to ExFlow now, sorry, I didn't mention the other reason why to use the agreement. The other reason is what we call acceptable usage policy. A very famous example is what we do at SignUp. All our consultants, they get their mobile phone bills paid by the company. And as long as they do not exceed 500 euros, they don't want to waste the time of the consultant and his manager looking at an invoice that is within the policy of the company. So think about utilities, electricity bills, water service bills, internet service bills, all those types of invoices, leasing, for instance. You could basically define an acceptable usage policy for in ExFlow agreements. You could bypass the approval chain and save the time that is spent by the approvers looking at those invoices. Now I'm going to go back to the document form. Search for the invoice. I'm going to search by approved since the invoice was automatically approved. If you don't know the status of the invoice, hit the checkbox saying show all, and then you could basically search all the invoices regardless of the status. Now, similar to how you filter in standard D365, click on the column, apply the search criteria, click apply, and here is the invoice. Now, if we look at the status of the invoice, it says approved. If we look at the lines down there, those were the two lines that were approved by ExFlow. I'm going to scroll a little bit to the right side, and here I could see the name of the suggested approver, and next to her name, there is an asterisk, and that's telling me that there is an extra comment that was added to each line on the invoice. If we look at the comment, it says system approved by ExFlow according to agreement 6522. So you basically have full traceability and transparency to know whether the approver have clicked or triggered the approve key, or was it ExFlow that have approved the invoice on behalf of the approver because you've got an agreement, or maybe because the invoice fully matches the purchase order. Now, after the invoice is approved, which in this case was automatic, there's going to be a batch job running behind the scenes, picking up the approved invoices and doing the final posting to D365. Very important to note, the final posting is happening in D365 and nowhere else. Now, if we want to think about the non-PO invoices, cost invoices, I go back to this slide, they're going to be captured by the OCR application. They're going to be automatically imported to the import form. They're going to be automatically coded by either AI, business proposal, or any of the other features that we provide out of the box. The invoice is going to be automatically matched, whether against an agreement or basically if it's a PO, it's going to be matched against the PO. Once the invoice is automatically approved, if you have an agreement, or maybe someone approves it if you do not have an agreement, the batch job is going to pick this invoice up, finally post it to D365 with literally no one touching the invoice. from the time it lands in until final posting, going to payment, no one touching the invoice. So zero human interaction. Good. So the second scenario that I'm going to cover throughout this session is basically a purchase order invoice, which is a fully matching one. So I'm going to go back to the import form, and similar to how we process a non-PO invoice, a purchase order invoice is processed. So in the import form, you've got the header information up on top, line information below. The only difference that you would recognize is the purchase order number that is associated with the invoice. You could even see the status of the purchase order. And what's even cooler is on the line information, where the line type is item or procurement category, you could basically know whether this invoice line has a discrepancy on. So for instance, this line is a fully matching line. There's no price variance, no quantity variance. Let's move on to the second invoice in the queue. This line has a price variance. So the price coming on the invoice might be higher or lower than what you've got on the purchase order. We move on to that one. The third one in the queue, we've got quantity variance. So it means that either the quantity on the invoice exceeds what you have receipted, or maybe you haven't received any goods at all. If I move on to the one below it, we've got consolidated purchase order invoice. That means one invoice pointing to multiple purchase orders. You could see different purchase order numbers, and that is, of course, supported. Some of the lines might be fully matching, and that means those lines will not go out for approval, whereas the third line in this case has a price variance on. That means that would be the only line going out for approval. Let's take a look at the last invoice that we've got in the queue. That is also a consolidated invoice pointing to multiple purchase orders. And of course, only lines with discrepancies are the lines that will be sent out for approval. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick up the invoice that is fully matched. Now, due to the time frame that we've got, I'm focusing on fully automated invoices. We've got header information on top, line information below. If we look at the matching result, it says fully matched, and that means we've got no discrepancy on the invoice. I'm going to copy the invoice number. I'm going to click on General and hit the post key. Now, as soon as I post this invoice, I would expect that this invoice is going to be automatically approved because we've got no discrepancies. And by the time this gets posted, I'm going to try on the second tab to go to the document form. And I'm going to search by approved. And I will use the invoice number. There we go. I would say it's now registered. So if I look at the message details in the import form, it says the invoice with the following number is now approved. That's because it was a fully matched invoice. In the document form, I could see the status of the invoice saying approved. If I look at the lines, I could see the same line details, the status of the line, it says matched. Even though Maria, my colleague, was a suggested approver, next to her name, there is an asterisk saying that there's an extra comment that was added, and the extra comment is telling you this line was system approved by ExFlow. So Maria did not trigger the approve key in any of the approval platforms. Now, of course, final step is having this invoice picked up by the batch, finally posted to D365. We could, of course, manually trigger the posting. So you could click on edit, of course. And as soon as you click on general post from ExFlow form, it will redirect you to the standard D365 purchase order posting form, feeding it with all the data that is in ExFlow so that the posting is happening in D365 and nowhere else. So let's do that. Good. So now we are in standard D365 PO posting form. The last thing you probably want to do is hit the post key, and this invoice will get finally posted. Now, once we get this finally posted, we will probably visit the purchase order because I want to show you full transparency between ExFlow and D365 when it comes to invoices. Again, whatever I'm doing manually here, you will not you will not be doing, because the batch job will be running behind the scenes, picking up those invoices and doing the final posting on your behalf. So from the time the invoice is received, the registration process if the invoice is valid, and the final posting if the invoice is valid too, will not require your interaction. Now, this invoice is now finally posted to D365. If I click on the purchase order number, I'm now redirected to the purchase order. Right? And of course, if you guys are familiar with standard D365 purchase order forms, I'm going to click on the invoice tab. You can see the status of the purchase order has been updated to invoiced. That means there is no further quantities to invoice on this PO. And of course, if we click on the invoice journal, now, this is the invoice that was processed. I want you to know anywhere in D365 ExFlow could cause financial impact, you should find ExFlow key on top of the form. Click on it and say, show me the invoice image. Or click on ExFlow and say, take me to the document form with a pre-filtered view of the invoice causing this financial impact. And now we are redirected to standard D365. We are redirected to ExFlow form with a pre-filtered view of the invoice that have basically created the transactions on the purchase order. Now, not only this, you could go to General Ledger Audit Trial, where you basically have full visibility over the vouchers. Click on any voucher. If ExFlow was the reason behind that voucher, you will see the exact same key saying ExFlow on top of the form. Click on it. You could have access to the invoice image, or you can get redirected to the document form where you could have a pre-filtered view of the invoice causing the financial impact. Now, last but not least, because I know we just have few minutes, I think it's very important that we go through the dashboards. I'm not going to cover all of them. There are quite many, but I think some of them are quite interesting, and I would like to point them out. In this workspace, it's inside ExFlow. It's a workspace, of course, inside D365. We've got a lot of dashboards that would show you an overview of the invoice process, and of course, some information about the performance of the AP, performance of the approvers, and performance of your suppliers. These dashboards, they're split into 6 different sections. One that is giving you full overview of the invoice process, one that is specific to cost invoices, 2 specific to purchase order invoices, and at the very end, 2 specific for the approvers in your company. Quickly pointing out to some of them. So if I click on cost invoices, one of the dashboards here is showing you the top 10 suppliers you're working with when it comes to cost invoices based on the value you've been purchasing from those suppliers. And of course, I think the purchase order overview is quite interesting for me, because you could see who are the top 10 suppliers you're working with when it comes to matching an invoice. So those suppliers are basically matching your purchase orders with the invoices they're sending to you, whereas the one below, those are the top 10 worst suppliers that your company might be working with, because they're never matching your invoices. They either send you invoices with price variances or quantity variances. As a company or as a business, you want to drill down to know which suppliers are basically sending us most of those invoices, and in what part of the year am I receiving the majority of those invoices. So if I look at the first graph here, for instance, I've got 2 peaks, one in June 2022, saying almost 14% of invoices received in June 2022 had a quantity variance on. And of course, another peak in December 2022 with around also the same value, 14% of invoices received had a quantity variance on. You probably want to know which supplier is sending you those invoices, and here's where the table next to it comes into play, where you could see all the suppliers sending you invoices with quantity variances, and of course the figures, how much of those invoices are received from those suppliers. So the highest figure goes to almost 44% coming from one supplier. In that case, Telia, for instance, I mean, just to point this out, the data here is demo and has nothing to do with the reality of the supplier. In that case, you would basically know that 44% of the invoices received from 44% of the invoices with quantity variance are received from one supplier. Same thing goes to invoices with price variances. There's a peak here of 15% of those invoices received in October 2022. You probably want to know which supplier is sending you those invoices. 82% from those invoices are also received from Telia. So as a business, you probably want to contact this supplier and say, hey, you're the worst supplier we're working with when it comes to matching our invoices. You're never delivering the goods on time, and you're not even matching the prices we have agreed upon when we issued the purchase order confirmation. Last but not least, the approvers tab. And of course, it's quite interesting because you could basically trace the performance of the suppliers. Now, this is a demo environment. I do not have sufficient data, but you could basically compare the performance of the supplier on average. How long is it taking them to approve the invoice? You can compare 2 years, 2 different years, 2 different months of different years together, and you can tell whether the performance is improving or declining for each supplier. And there's one on a global level. So for all the suppliers in the company, you could basically tell if the average for approving the invoices is increasing or not. And if we look at this graph, we've got 2 peaks, one in July 2022 and another one in December 2022. And that's probably because employees are on summer vacation and Christmas vacation during these time frames. Otherwise, I'm going to leave the last few minutes. I'm not sure if we still have time, but I think it's important that I give you time to ask questions. Sorry
yes,
if I
of
got
course,
over time.
this is the time for the questions. So feel free to ask, write it down on the chat in case you have questions. We are almost running out of time, but we still have a moment. If you have questions, you can ask them right now. Otherwise, we will be more than happy to answer any question to whatever you want to know about it, about this platform or the Eleqtus solutions. Feel free to contact us afterward. Derek and I will be more than happy to answer them. And thank you very much, Ali, for your support. I know that it's very challenging to present in such a short amount of time, such a full complex tool, but you have done a great job. So
thank you. I mean, when it comes to ExFlow, it's I think there's a lot of features that we can talk about. Unfortunately, time is quite limited for us, but
yeah.
I'm always interested to listen to any of those discussions and to help out. And I want to thank you all, and especially the participants who have been listening to me.